Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Thursday, December 4th, and it's our pleasure to have with us today our guest, Dr. Lesley-Ann Dupigny-Giroux. She is the state climatologist for the state of Vermont, has been doing that since 1997. She's also a professor of climatology at the University of Vermont and was also the president of the American Association of State Climatologists from 2020 to 2022. In 2020, she was also appointed by the Vermont House of Representatives to the Vermont Climate Council as a member with expertise in climate change science. So we are very pleased to welcome Professor Dupigny-Giroux to the studio today. Professor, welcome to GNAT-TV, and thank you for making the time for this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, Andrew. I am really looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Well, I just thought we could start with maybe having you tell us a little bit about what your job is as the state climatologist. What does that encompass?
So being state climatologist in my case means that it's part of the service role that I have as a faculty member here at the University of Vermont. And that role has grown over the years, over the 29 years that I've been privileged to serve in it, so that I get to work with state legislatures. I get to work with K through 12 students and teachers. I answer questions from the public. Anything that anybody needs from a weather, climate change perspective, looking out into the future, what's taken place in the past, in the 1800s, and everything else in between. I get all sorts of questions, including things like, we're getting married next June. What's the weather going to be like? And, I have to actually try and respond to the best of my ability to every type of question that I get.
I promise I won't throw you a hard question like that while we're
Okay,
talking.
good. Thank you.
Well, but that would have been good to know way back in the good old
It
days.
would have.
So, I guess what are some of the main climate or climatology issues facing Vermont that you're covering most closely? I mean, that's an area that's received a lot of attention in recent years with the flooding that's occurred, 3 years in a row, 2023 through this past summer. At the
Hmm.
same time, conversely, we've also had issues with droughts.
Right.
This fall, we had a time when there wasn't enough rain. Um, what are some of the areas that you're most focused on in the climate area?
So I think you hit the nail on the head with the precipitation extremes. So going from floods to droughts, and looking at what we saw this summer in particular, which is one of the newer types of droughts called a flash drought, because of how quickly it developed. It developed in like a couple of weeks, as opposed to, when people think about drought, it's usually this extended time, and then, oh, we're in the middle of a drought, and then extended time to come out. And I think as the science progresses, one of the things that we know right now is that bringing high temperatures into play, bringing how much we're losing from the plants evapotranspiring, all of those are always part of understanding droughts, but also how quickly these new types of droughts occur, right? So there's that. There's the who gets too much precipitation and is subject to repeat flooding. That's another piece that we're looking at. We're also looking at places that don't usually get flooding, like in the kingdom. And what do we need to better understand in order to get the word out to help folks prepare for the next time we have some of those events? And we can think even more broadly, because Vermont is part of the Northeast. And so we're seeing things like wildfires, both here in the state, but also in southern parts of Quebec, for example. And so we're looking at all of these pieces. And then we also have to make sure that we're looking at populations and the ways in which high temperatures in the day and lower temperatures in the night are affecting us from a physiological perspective, because as Northeasterners, we're not so used to having really, really high temperatures. So how do we make sure that we get the word out to folks, so that just in case you need to take some sort of action, whether it's a cooling center or whether it's staying indoors or trying to keep that heat level down, making sure that everybody knows some of the things that are going on right now. So there's so many pieces, and they're all interconnected, which is why it becomes so important to really have a lot of public engagement and awareness taking place.
Is this a sequence of flash floods, you know, followed by a drought or with a drought mixed into it. Is that unusual, or is that something new and different that we're seeing that maybe we haven't seen in the past, or is that just sort of a continuation of a pattern that you could look back 50 years and say, well, the same thing happened in
Right.
1950, 1960, whatever?
hmm So I think it's both, and that's what the challenges becomes in terms of messaging. So because I like to do a lot of historical climatology, I have had a chance and opportunity and privilege to go back through time and see how some of the years in the past, so like the early 1910s, for example, 1940s, 1960s. We went from a dry time, like a drought, severe drought, and then we were in flooding within 2 days. And so that's something that we've seen in the past. And what makes it different now is the speed with which some of those droughts are starting, how much precipitation is falling, like that is increasing, and the ability to then understand why some years we flood and some years we don't is also a new piece that we need to really capture, and so we can get that word out to folks so that they know some of the challenges that we're dealing with. Because if you think about it, every sector that is affected by moisture extremes, whether it's floods or droughts, the more you know, the better you can prepare, if possible, right?
And what are some of the kinds of preparations that could be taken or developed? The word resilience is often used
Mm-hmm.
when it comes with floods.
Right.
We can talk about other kinds of climate situations as well, but I mean, just because we can look back and say, well, we got a lot of rain 3 years in a row at one point in July.
Mm-hmm.
What is that historical background? How does that inform us as to what we need to do going forward?
Right. So historical pieces are important because at least they're a touch point for at least one point in time or few points in time. And at least having lived through or known what could happen is important. But at the same time, we also know that some of the things that could happen next week, next year, next 10 years have not been observed. And so that's part of the message that as climatologists we need to get out there, that yes, we know what could occur and what has occurred and what sort of strategies that you might have taken or your grandparents might have taken to make sure you weren't flooded out, or to make sure that you had the right crop mix in place so that you didn't lose everything in times of severe drought. But at the same time, folks who do a lot of the modeling and folks who do a lot of the insurance and reinsurance industries, they know that there are things that are coming down the pike that we have not seen. And so what we're trying to do right now is to try and get a handle on what those numbers are, how much rain, who might be affected, so that at least you have a ballpark of what to shoot for, right? Because if you don't, then you're shooting blanks in the dark. And I think that's not the best use of resources. So it's a multi-pronged approach using history, but also trying to see what additional amounts of whatever, whether it's temperature or precipitation or changes in species, what else could be coming down the pike so that you can make more informed decisions.
What are some of the areas you think the state of Vermont is most vulnerable to in terms of impacts of climate? I mean, as I think about it, I think, well, the first thing that comes to mind is the ski industry, for instance. We might not get as much snow, although it's snowing right here as we speak, so it doesn't seem to be a problem right now this year. Um, but tourism, fall foliage, for instance, maple syrup, I would imagine, is another
Okay.
product of the state that is highly weather dependent. Are those the main ones, or are there others that you're saying, hey guys, if we don't do something, we're going to have a problem with this?
Right. So that's a great question, Andrew. And I think the best answer to that is everybody is susceptible in one form or another, one shape or another, one sector or another. And I think in addition to the ones that you listed there, which are all great, some of the ones that we don't always keep in mind are infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I think a lot of folks will think, oh, road infrastructure because of the visuals of whenever the roads get washed out, and that's a historical piece because where the roads and the rivers are so close together because, the roads went in at a time when, you only followed where the land went. But when I say infrastructure, I'm also thinking about the energy infrastructure, the grid. And as we get higher and higher temperatures, can we handle that load? So it's an all Vermonter piece because every single sector could be affected and could be touched. So I think this is a time where it's an all hands on deck, all sectors on deck, all peoples on deck.
That point you make about the grid is kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
So the electric power lines that we all see along the sides of the road, how would they how that carry electricity from one place to another, and have been a subject of a lot of discussion recently as we've been, whether it's a question of increasing electricity rates or building data centers for artificial intelligence plants using tremendous amounts of new electricity, increasing the demand for that. Uh, and I have been reading that the grid itself needs some work, some updating, some strengthening. It's not as robust as it could be.
Right.
How does climate, though, affect uh, electricity traveling in wires from one place to another?
So the actual technology piece is not part of my wheelhouse, but what is part of my wheelhouse is thinking about all of the ways in which our weather and climate could actually affect, power lines, at least the above ground power lines. And it ranges from freezing rain, like we saw that in the ice storm in 1998, where you can have like 2 or 3 inches of ice on your lines, and you might think it's not a lot, but it's like anywhere between 200 and 400% extra weight on those lines, right? And so freezing rain is something that, not always front and center, but it should be when we're thinking of power and utilities, right? You think about excess heat and whether we have all the mechanisms in place to safely have that load being passed through. The other piece that's important for the utility sector is, of course, winds, high winds, heavy snow, all of those things that could be changing as we step into the future. And again, making sure that you are thinking about it holistically, just for that one sector. Like we could have a whole show on just that one sector, right? Making sure we're thinking about that holistically so that you're able to actually continue to power stuff. And when you think about additional sources of power, um, some of them need additional amounts of cooling, like getting rid of that wastewater from the heating plants. And so, again, it's a multifaceted, absolutely fascinating to actually try and make sure you're not missing anything.
Wow, that is pretty interesting. Now, I noticed in your bio that you also do a lot of work with uh, students in schools, elementary through high school. I guess I just wondered, what is that like? Do you, when you go to the schools and talk to the kids, I mean, do they have a sense of, the climate is maybe different from what it was, at some point in the past, or what it's like today, or do they have concerns, or is it like not really on their radar yet?
So when you started asking that question, you saw how big I started to smile because students are my absolute joy. And folks will always say to me, "Why do you keep doing what you're doing? And how do you get out of bed every morning?" And I always say, "Oh my goodness me, it's the students." Because not just the amount of energy that they bring to all of this, it's the sophistication of the questions that they ask and the ways in which they see things so clearly and are able to say, okay, so do we have the information that we need? Can we come up with some solutions or strategies that, me as an older person may not have thought about, right? And so absolute joy to work with students and to really tap into that focus and brilliance that they bring and sort of make sure that their sense of hope and their sense of let's do something now is really front and center.
And that interest and enthusiasm carries over once they get to college, right?
It sure does. Not by the time they're seniors, but definitely when they're first semester, first years. I had the joy of actually talking to some first semester, first years on Monday and helping with some scouts in Mountain do their weather badge last night. And again, it's that, that sort of eagerness to really learn about weather, climate, and our changing climate that is just, it's so precious and it's such a privilege to work with students, all ages, all ages.
Now, you're from originally from Trinidad, right? Trinidad and
Mhm.
Tobago, I guess is the proper term. It's an island in the southern Caribbean.
Correct.
I just wondered, did growing up there influence your interest in becoming a climatologist in some way or another, or how did that all impact it?
Absolutely. And I think every life experience that you have shapes you, both as a person as well as professionally. And I think in my case, because our school system is a British school system, I was fortunate enough to have learned about and to have studied physical geography and climatology from, as early back as elementary school and into high school. And that's where I think my focus on really tapping into, how 3-year-olds always ask, but why, but why? And I think I sort of carry that sort of enthusiasm for putting things together. Why is the atmosphere doing this? How is it interacting with the wetlands? What about the Caroni swamp? And why are the birds only come at this particular time of the day? And I think that for me, is what sort of propelled me through because I was able to sort of be exposed to it early on and be exposed to the way in which all sciences fit together. So geography and chemistry, biology, physics, math, they all fit together. And the curriculum that I went through actually allows me to kind of see that, which is why I then bring that into the classes that I teach today.
That's fascinating. So let me just turn to your work with the Vermont Climate Council. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization? What does it do, and what is your role in it?
So the Vermont Climate Council was stood up as a result of the Global Warming Solutions Act, Act 153, back in 2020. And there are a number of members of the council who are either appointed by the Vermont House of Representatives or the Vermont Senate. And then there are councillors who are also part of the state of Vermont, the administration. And the goal in this was to actually put forth strategies for both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the deleterious impacts thereof, but also coming up with strategies for advancing adaptation and resilience for all Vermonters, for all sectors. And so the very first climate action plan that was created by the council came out in December of 2021, and the latest update was approved for the 1st of July 2025 deadline. So a lot of this is discussions, learning, conversations, coming to consensus, trying to find what is the right mix for Vermonters and whether we got it right or whether we need to still have some tweaks, some really, really honest conversation on what the next steps are going to be and continue to be, because a lot of this involves rulemaking by the Agency of Natural Resources. So, in support of all of the work that we do as counselors, there are so many volunteers, both from Vermont, but also from the state of Vermont agencies who help to support the work by serving on various committees, subcommittees, task force that bring like very specialized expertise to help us make a lot of the decisions or even get just the right science in the room. So it's been this really collaborative effort. I can't believe it's like over 4 years now. We've been doing it for so long. These are like some of my closest colleagues, right? Because we just spend so much time together in having those, like I said, honest conversations on, hey, what's working for Vermonters? Can we afford it? Or what do we need to change?
Right. Well, that question of affordability is certainly a large one, and it seems like when the state legislature was discussing the the clean heat standard and the carbon market idea, the carbon credits, that whole question of whether or not it was going to be affordable for the state was one that kind of both large at the time. I guess I just wondered what do you think the state should do that it's not doing or could be doing that would be within the range of the affordability area that would be good to do and smart to do and would pay off in the long run?
Yeah. So there are a lot of suggestions that are on the table, and I think having a little bit more time to actually parse through them would be the best thing that I could say for right now, because that's one of the things that comes up every single meeting. Whether or not we can afford some of the things that have been listed as priorities in the climate action plan. Where's the money going to come from? How do we actually have the conversations that we need to have? Because it's some really hard conversations, right? If you think about it, given all the other things that we're facing right now, um, how do we actually do good, not just for ourselves, but for future generations? And I think um, that's one of the things that still is on the agenda. Like we have a meeting coming up in the next 10 days or so. And how do we actually kind of work through this? Because all of these are public meetings, right? Every last one. So how do you make sure that you're honoring all of the perspectives that folks bring to the table? Um, Having an open space and a welcoming space for new ideas that we haven't thought about. So I might come with something today, Andrew, and then, in 5 days' time, another idea might come up. It's even better than the one that we're chatting about. So I think to that extent, it's always a learning process.
Okay. Well, just before we have to run, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on the recently concluded COP30 meeting down in Brazil. I mean, did that kind of advance anything? It seemed like it was a very indecisive, nothing much came out of it. But maybe I'm mistaken in that. It could well be. But was that something that was kind of something you were following as far as an indicator of where things might be headed?
Right. And as much as I would love to, I just didn't have that opportunity this semester, Andrew, because I was chairing the drought task force, which met pretty much every single week for this semester. And it was one of those, oh my goodness me, it's like teaching a third class that I was not anticipating teaching. And so a lot of the additional pieces that I had planned to kind of stay on top of, I wasn't able to. I think I was also teaching a class that worked directly with the town of Richmond, and Vermont Emergency Management and the Drought Task Force itself. And so between all of those, I didn't have that chance to really dive into COP30. But holidays are coming, so maybe we'll chit chat again in the new year about that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they recorded all those sessions in one way or another, but that's interesting. So there's a drought task force that the state has got to what? The next time there's a severe drought, like we saw back a couple months ago, we'll have some tools in the toolkit we can take off the shelf or something like that.
Well, actually, two things about that, Andrew, now that you brought it up. We're still in droughts, and it's the hydrologic drought, the one that has to do with the aquifers and the groundwater, that we still have not cleared that bar yet. So, newsflash, we're still in droughts, although, we've been getting rain and snow, so the meteorological side of things are looking okay. We're still not out of the woods yet from, folks who are on wells, for example, or whose public water supplies are still coming back. We're still thinking about that. So part of what happens every time that we go into a drought is that there's a task force that gets activated. And part of the rationale for the task force is to follow it, see what needs to be in place. Do we need to activate the National Guard? Do we need to get water buffalo out there? Making sure that we have all of the plans in place to help all Vermonters. And the drought this year, first of all, it's a carryover from 2024 because we never really came back in terms of aquifers. And so this one, because of how quickly it started, and the fact that it's dragged on for 3 months is something that's new for us to learn from. Because should this happen again, in the next little bit, we need to have learned enough lessons to make sure that we're doing stuff more proactively next time we're in a drought. Because droughts occur. They will occur. They have occurred in every climate, and we need to know that so that we can prepare for them.
You remind me that on a recent trip across Vermont, driving around some of the roads next to rivers, the rivers were at probably the lowest level I can remember seeing in 30 or 40 years. I mean, it was really stunning, actually, to see, you know, river bottoms where you'd never be able to see them before. So that probably has a lot of knock-on effects with water supplies and gosh, I mean, that powers people's wells and eventually and all the rest.
Absolutely. And so since you brought that up, I'm going to put a plug and a plea that if folks are still seeing signs of all of the droughts around the state, to please send them into there's a website I'll send to you after. It's called the Conditions Monitoring Observers reporting system. And any pictures that you have, like exactly what you just talked about, Andrew, with those boulders or like 6 inches of water in a stream that you've never seen like that. Any pictures like that, we still need to know about, because it's putting all of those parts of the jigsaw together that will allow us to know when we finally cleared that hydrological piece. When are those streams looking like they would usually look like for this time of the year? When are wells back? When are the aquifers recharged? It's all of those pieces that folks can continue to send in the information. I would absolutely love hearing from everybody.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there for today, Professor. But once again, thank you very much for making the time. Dr. Lesley-Ann Dupigny-Giroux, a professor at the University of Vermont and climatologist, and the state climatologist as well. Thank you again very much, Professor. I really appreciate your time, and certainly a fascinating subject.
It's been an absolute delight, Andrew. Thank you again for the invitation.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to all of you who've been with us. Hope you found the show interesting. We'll see you again the next time. Take care.